Gingell out of the hold of Mesco. Good snap, good hold, and the kick is blocked. Appalachian State has stunned the college football world. One of the greatest upsets in sports history.
Welcome to The Rock.
Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. Today, we are taking a look at Appalachian State Mountaineers, who finished 9-5, winning the Sun Belt East. They capped off the season with a win in the Avocados for Mexico Curate Bowl and just wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on March 23rd. We have a special guest joining us today. Welcome to the show. Publisher for the App State Mania can be found on X at App State Mania, David Ware. Welcome, David.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. Boy, you really hit some milestone games there in the intro video.
Hopefully you got, all those juices came back. I mean, I know that last highlight there is FCS Appalachian State, but that was a huge, huge game in App State history.
Well, all those games really were, and in addition to publishing my site, for the past couple of years, I've also joined App State's radio team and have done some sideline reporting for that. The Texas A&M clips you showed, I was actually on the call that day, so that was another memorable game.
All right. Well, hey, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you kind of got started covering App State and becoming a publisher for App State Mania.
I don't know that we've got enough time to give you the whole story. Here's the Reader's Digest version. I spent most of my career working for Fortune 300 companies, very large companies. And as I started kind of winding that part of my career back a little bit, I knew I needed something to keep myself busy or my wife would kick me out of the house. So I started just when we started the move up to the FBS level and into the Sun Belt. I started publishing the site. It's bounced around a little bit. I originally launched it on the Scout Network, which of course is now defunct. And it's defunct because it was acquired by 24/7. So a couple of sites merged together. And I've been running that kind of that merged presence for the last few years since we joined 24/7. So, it was just something I have always had a passion for sports writing. I just got into some different professional avenues over the course of my career, but it was always something I wanted to come back to. I'm a huge recruiting junkie, so doing that with somewhere like 24/7 or Scout is a natural fit for me.
Awesome. We'll jump right into some App State spring practice here. So, App State is one of the teams in the Sun Belt that has a lot of returning production from last year. And it kind of starts with the quarterback with Joey Aguilar. Last season, Joey averaged 32.8 passing attempts, 268 yards per game. He totaled 3,757 yards and 33 touchdowns, which I believe both of those are single season records for App State. How did he look this spring? Did he just kind of continue where he left off?
Yeah, I think for the most part he did. I think the thing that people maybe forget about Joey, because he had such an incredible season last year, is, he had just made the move up from junior college. You're talking about a guy who's been in this system for a year now. He's played 14 FBS level games. There's still upside to Joey's game, bottom line. And, I saw a lot of that in spring. He's much more comfortable with the system. He's very comfortable with the wide receiver group, most of which is back for him. Most importantly, he and offensive coordinator Frank Ponce are really in lockstep together. So Joey was really sharp. He's a gunslinger, so every now and then he might test Frank's patience. And there was a Saturday scrimmage where they were a little too cavalier with the ball down in the red zone, and that got corrected pretty quickly. His last scrimmage was very clean, but Joey is just a very unique guy. He's from California, and we don't have many guys from Cali here at App. And he's got kind of that mentality, that cool personality that if you know people from California, it's just unique. He's not the super intense guy we normally have here at App State, and frankly, I think the change has been really good. He's a guy that can, he can leave the moment behind him, whether it was good or whether it was bad. He never gets caught up in it. It's always on to the next thing. And, I think that's his biggest strength, but he was very sharp this spring. He missed the last week with, there was a little bit of a flu bug going around up here, but, up until that point, his progression was, I think, what everybody, pretty much wanted to see.
Awesome.
That's great to hear. Talking about that quarterback room or the position. So let's talk about the room. This offseason, they lost quarterback Ryan Berger. He went off to Liberty, I believe, through the transfer portal, and they brought in quarterback Charles Wright from Texas. How did the quarterback room shape up this spring, and who do you expect to be the primary backup?
Well, if I'm being really honest about it, I think that's a question that's still up in the air. It's always tough when you come into somewhere new and you've got to try to pick up the system, the vernacular. You've got to get accustomed to the players you're around. And our defense does not take it easy on the offense up here. It's a very fast offense. It's a very experienced defense. And, a lot of times the competition's pretty stiff. But I would say that, based on the coach's comments, especially after our last Saturday scrimmage this past weekend, there's still work to be done there. They're not satisfied with where things are. I don't think they're in a position right now where they would name a definitive backup. It's just one of those things that's going to have to continue to play itself out. The beauty of summer is the guys are here all year. They will be doing PLPs. They'll have some coaching input for that kind of thing too. But, just to be blunt about it, there's still some work to be done there. And that's not me speaking out of school. The coaches have said the same thing in interviews with me.
So App State has a couple young 3-star quarterbacks and redshirt freshmen, Mason McHugh, and true freshman, early enrollee Matthew Wilson. How did they look this spring?
Well, Mason was part of what I'd call that primary backup competition with Charles Wright. Again, I'll just kind of go back to what I said. There's work to be done there. If you know anything about Mason's background, he really missed a couple of years of high school football due to COVID. He kind of went and put himself in some really competitive situations with some great programs, but it was his senior season before he actually played a full year of football. So, he's a little bit behind, I think, in that regard. It's tough to come into college and try to, force feed experience. So, he's got some work to do. Matthew Wilson, he looked like a freshman would and should look at this level. He's got some work to do, but he throws a great ball. That was what got him here in the first place. He came here for a summer camp last year and frankly just lit it up. And, the coaches said, we've not seen, and we're probably not going to see a better performance in that in person here. So he earned his way in with that day of work. And, he's just going to have to keep going, keep pushing. At this point in your career, you show up mid-semester, you're just trying to figure out which way to go on campus to get to your next class, much less come up here against a very good defense and try to master this offense. So it just takes time. And, I think as fans anymore, we've just gotten so impatient. Guys aren't on the field in 2 years, and all of a sudden people start asking what's wrong with them. Nothing's wrong with them. Some of the best players in App State history didn't take on a prominent role until they were in their third season. So, I think it's just a matter of having patience and allowing him the time to develop.
Speaking about the quarterbacks and last season, we alluded to earlier, App State seemed to pass at a much higher rate than I would say we would come to expect, in years past. Do you think that will continue in 2024, or will they lean, more on the running game like we've seen in the past?
I think it's always hard to predict that because you never know what the game situation is going to allow you.
Sure.
Bottom line, to your point, App State, especially in the FBS era, has been historically a 60 to 65% run heavy team. And, other teams are obviously they're scouting App. They know what's coming. You start bringing 7th guy into the box, 8th guy into the box. If you're going to do that, these guys are going to drop back and throw it against you because that's the intent of the running game in the first place. We want to create numbers mismatches. And, when those things happen, they will throw or they will, run the ball accordingly. I think when you have a quarterback that did what Joey did last year and produces the kind of numbers he did, you have to, feed the monster, let him eat. You've got to throw the ball, but there does have to be balance. And, that's one of the things I think offensive coordinator Frank Ponce is really good at. He would be the first to tell you he's a stubborn guy. And sometimes he will run it stubbornly. And, I know you guys want to talk about running backs in a minute. As good as Joey is as a passer, we've got 4 running backs who are all starter quality here. And you want to be able to utilize them all. I mean, if you could get, 2 separate balls on the field, you'd throw it in one direction, hand it off in the other. But since they don't let you do that, you try to distribute the ball as much as you can to every playmaker, realizing there are only so many touches a game.
And you touched on those, 4 running backs. You got Kanye Roberts, Mikael Haywood, Anderson Castle, and Amani Marshall that are all returning. You do lose Nate Noel to the transfer portal. How did those guys look this spring in the running back room?
They look great. And I'm the first to say they're very unofficial stats, but I kept stats during the scrimmages. Among those 4 guys, that was where the offense was its most consistent. They were averaging between 6 and 7 yards a carry. And the thing I like about this group is there are no 2 of them that run the same way. They all bring different skill sets onto the field. So, you get a defense sees, 3, 4, 5 carries from one of them. The next guy comes in and they feel like maybe they've got an understanding of what's coming at him, and he runs completely differently. I think that mix of runners and the ability to keep them fresh throughout a game is huge. And I think situationally you'll see some of them at different times, but at the end of the day, they're all capable of getting a hot hand, and I think that's a lot of how they will be managed this year. If somebody's really in a groove, let them go, and there's always somebody else ready to come in if there are injuries, and there always are. You've got a good stable there that you can count on. I think we're very fortunate to have all 4 of those guys because they're all very hard workers and very talented running backs.
Do you feel that based off of like the game not the game situation, but like the game itself, that game plan going in might have a different starter, week 1 versus week 2 versus week 3? Or do you think we'd see the same first guy in? Maybe not, the whole game type thing, but what do you think there?
I'm. It's always hard to say. I will tell you this: the App State coaches take practice performance very seriously. They believe that the way you practice is the way you're going to play, and they reward that during the week. If you ask me to bet the money in my pocket on it, I think Kanye Roberts probably is the first guy out. He was great during spring ball. And, it was interesting. I think everybody kind of understands what we have in Kanye, and the other guys were maybe getting a little more work. But here's the thing. Kanye was the big play guy of the group when it came to spring ball. I had him averaging literally over 14 yards a carry. He housed about 3 big runs. He didn't touch it a lot, but when he did a lot of damage with it. I think it's probably good for him to show that he's got that second level breakaway ability, but it's also good for him not to take a lot of wear and tear during spring ball. The other guys are all capable. If any one of them showed up in the starting lineup, it wouldn't surprise me and it wouldn't worry me. I'll kind of summarize it that way.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Marshall in 2022? He had some big games towards the end of the season. 2023 didn't look like that really carried over. Did he have an injury, or kind of what was kind of going on here in 2023?
Well, I'll tell you, he did have an injury in 2023, had an MCL sprain that happened, unfortunately, just at the beginning of the season, like right before we got ready to open. And actually, to tell you the truth about Amani, he had an injury in 2022 as well. You mentioned he really showed up strongly at the end of the season. He missed a chunk of games at the beginning of the year. That was more of an upper body thing. He had the lower body injury this past season. And it's tough for Amani because he is a very good running back. To his credit, when he come back in late in the season and the rotations are kind of set, it's hard to break your way in. But, one thing I love about Amani is he's a great special teams contributor. Whatever they ask him to do, he comes out and does it. He's going to cover kickoffs. He's just a guy that's a great team player. And, he's somebody that if you're behind the curtain at App State, he's one of those guys you say, I really want to see him have the opportunity to do well because he's done everything right since he's been here. Nobody can avoid injuries, completely. And he's just had it's not only been that he's been injured, he's gotten injured at a point that really hurts his progress. Because, when you're out for the first 5-6 weeks of the season, you got to come back and get in game shape before you can really be your best. And, he's just had a tough break both seasons, but I'm hopeful for him that he's going to be able to play, 13, 14 really healthy games this year.
And like you said, there's a difference between getting in shape and game shape. Two different things.
Very much.
Switching gears over to the receivers, in 2023, Caden Robinson broke out in a big way with 67 receptions for 905 yards and 10 touchdowns. How did he look in the spring, and can we kind of expect him to have a repeat performance in 2024?
Well, defensive coordinator Scott Sloan probably would not like to hear me say this, but Caden was unstoppable in spring ball. He really was. And, something happened. So right at the end of the season, we played Miami of Ohio in the Cure Bowl or the Waterlogged Bowl.
The Rain Fest, like
I've
14 turnovers or something, right? That's crazy.
Yeah, well, there were 13 fumbles in that game. I mean, there's just to give you an idea. I've never seen anything like it. And I've seen a lot of football. But, just before that game, our starting slot receiver actually entered the portal. So Caden actually moved from an outside. He was playing to the boundary side most of the time, and he moved into the slot and had a phenomenal game that day. I think it was around 118, 120 yards. Caden is such a crafty, smart receiver. The beauty of being in the slot in this offense is, it's probably the one place where routes are a little more flexible as he's reading things coming across the middle. If he wants to flatten out, if he thinks he should take it over the top, if he wants to go skinny post, he makes a read, and he and Joey really have a connection with one another that Joey sees what Caden sees. And that was what made him so difficult to cover in spring ball was, if you adjusted to him in one place, he'd just go to another. And he was really fantastic in spring ball. I'm excited to see him there. He'll be in the slot when we're in 11 personnel with one tight end. If we go 2 tight ends, he will kick back out to the boundary side. But, he's a guy that you need to have on the field, and you got to get the ball in his hands because he's really got phenomenal instincts for the game.
In 2022, App State brought in a big recruiting win with FCS freshman All-American wide receiver Mekhi Jackson. How did he look this spring, and do you think he'll be a bigger part of this offense here in 2024?
Well, I think Mekhi, I think when you come from the FCS level, and we love FCS players here because obviously that's part of our history, there was a little bit of an elevation he had to take with his game. You're playing against bigger guys, faster guys. First 4 or 5 games, fairly quiet for Mekhi. Over the last 9 games, he was really impactful. So, I would say his ascension really started later in the season last year, and he did continue with that into this year. I mentioned, if we're in 11 personnel with a single tight end, we will go with a 3 receiver look. Caden pops inside of the slot. Mekhi takes over that boundary spot that Caden was in last year. And then we've got Christian Horn, who's another very veteran receiver who plays to the field side. So, Mekhi's going to have a bigger role this year because he's going to be in that starting group. But he really came on as last season progressed, and I don't expect to see him do anything but continue to improve.
Speaking of new guys, you brought in William Foles, a transfer from Louisville that was there for spring practice. How did he look, and how do you think he fits into this wide receiver room?
I think right now I probably still haven't seen the best of him, but we saw some really good stuff. He's like anybody else. He might as well be a freshman because he's got to come in and learn the offense like anyone else does. Coach Lawrence Dawsey, who handles our receivers, is a real tactician. I mean, if you ever watch him run a practice, man, it's down to the finest details. And, I think William was probably trying to just figure out where he was going, what he needed to do in a lot of cases. But I also saw him make just some really great instinctive catches. I think as the year goes on, he probably fits maybe behind Mekhi Jackson in that boundary spot. And it's just a matter of, kind of getting up to speed and figuring out, where he's comfortable, figuring out what route packages are best for him, and just getting in sync with Joey Aguilar. If he can do those things, I think he's going to be very impactful. It is a crowded receiver room. There's a lot of talent in there. So, I don't know. I'm intrigued by him. We'll see how things progress for him. It's just a matter of reps for him right now. And, there are only 15 spring practices. Most of them are not contact oriented. Sometimes it's just hard to tell, but you can tell there's a lot of great physical talent there.
We talked about a lot of the returning production that App State has, but if they do have a spot that they are losing some of that returning production, it seems like it's coming from that offensive line. Where 2023 they had 4 players start all 14 games, but unfortunately they're going to lose 3 of them to graduation. Center Isaiah Helms, right guard Bucky Williams, and left guard Damian Daly. They do return the right tackle Jack Murphy and left tackle Thornton Gentry. How did the Mountaineers shore up the middle of that offensive line? How did they?
Yeah. Well, the good. You're right. We're losing some really good players that took a lot of snaps in there. In fact, I got to watch Bucky Williams and Isaiah Helms work out at our pro day on Monday. And that tells you the kind of caliber of players that they are. Interestingly enough, the answer to your question, how do you shore up the inside, were the other 2 names you mentioned. Right now, as we sit, Jack Murphy actually moved into center and was playing there during most of spring ball. He finished there. We'll see if he stays there. Offensive line coach Mike Cummings works his guys up and down the line. I mean, if I wasn't paying attention during practice, sometimes I would miss a new combination he threw out there. But for the moment, Jack is starting at center. Thornton Gentry, who you mentioned, that was at left tackle for a chunk of the season, he actually moved into right guard. So, what you have there is we've got some experienced players, some guys who were here last year. They just weren't on the field as much. Markel Samuel at left tackle started some games last year. Markel's interesting because he came in actually as a defensive end, and we moved him over to offensive line. So he's had a big transition to make, and he's made it successfully. It's just about consistency for him. But the measurables and what he can do there is really phenomenal. I think he'll start at left tackle. Georgia transfer Griffin Scroggs is playing at the left guard spot. He was here last season as well, got some meaningful snaps at times. And then Murphy at center, Gentry at right guard. And then we've got Florida State transfer Thomas Schrader, who came in, and he is playing at right tackle right now. That group I saw a lot of towards the end of spring camp, and they really gelled as the process went on. I mentioned the 6 to 7 yard per carry average that our running backs were having. That was part of it. You're not going to make those runs without those guys up front. I think the one place that probably everyone here would agree that they need to work on is a little more chemistry in the pass pro area. But they were moving the ball, and they were getting that chemistry aligned by the time we ended spring ball. It's just a matter of continuing to work on that. I think the bigger thing that they need to work on offensive line wise is depth behind those guys. I'd love to get through the season without a single injury, but that's an unrealistic expectation. So we've got some work to do there over summer. There may be some portal activity there, but bottom line, I think that starting 5 that's there right now, I feel really good about.
Was Michael Murata, was he there for the spring, or is he not coming in until the summer?
No, he was here for the spring.
Okay.
Michael actually got hurt at one point, had to sit out. I don't know. I'd probably call it maybe 6 or 8 practices. And I think he's trying to, we talked about Mekhi Jackson making that step up from FCS. Michael's doing the same thing. And he's been working both at center and guard during spring. We'll see what happens over the summer. Missing time in spring when you're a mid-year guy is tough, because that's where you learn the most. And losing those practices, I think, set him back some. But there will be open competition. When your head coach is a former offensive line coach, you better believe that he's watching, and he's going to make sure that he's got the 5 baddest dudes on the team out there for day one.
All right, kind of wrapping up on the offense side of the things. If you had to pick an offensive player to kind of have a breakout type year, who would you predict that might be?
Boy, you guys are putting me on the spot with that one. It's it's so hard to know. Guys come out of nowhere sometimes, and when you return as many veterans back, especially skill position guys, it's hard to break out. Because the breakout guys are already there. The guys that have broken out for the last 2 or 3 years. If I were going to pick someone I think can have a big impact that maybe we haven't seen as much, it would be running back Anderson Castle. He's just a big physical guy, gets north and south really quickly. Came in during that slop fest we had in the Cure Bowl, ran for, I think it was close to 120 yards. And the biggest thing there, I mentioned there were 13 fumbles that day. He held on to the rock, and that's why he got 20 carries that day. But, Anderson, back to talking about injuries, broke a bone in his foot in fall camp last year. We're within 2 weeks of the season, and he has that injury. They have to go in, they have to put a pin in it. You're talking a minimum of 6 weeks. And he didn't make it back until literally the last 4 games of the season. So people just haven't had a chance to see him, but he's a guy that fits our running style really well. There's no fooling around with Anderson. He's going to see the lane. He's going to accelerate into it. And I will tell you, if you're a second level defender and you're standing back there waiting on him, you better be prepared, because he's going to bring the shoulder to you. So he's a guy that I could see with a full complement of games to play this season. As somebody, people will say, holy cow, where did this guy come from? He's been there all along. He just, the injury really shortened him up last year.
Just trying to read between the lines a little bit. Do you think maybe he could carve out like the goal line back kind of role?
Could be. I mean, I think it depends on who you're playing, what kind of defense it is. Certainly he can be effective in that role, but I honestly, all these guys are pretty good in the red zone. Even Mikael Haywood, who's probably the slightest of all 4 of the running backs, he's really slippery when you get him down there in the red zone. So I think Anderson, maybe when you've got that, and Sean Clark loves going for a 4th down up here. When you've got that 4th and short, he's a guy you don't mind sending into the middle of the line.
All right. Well, moving over to the defensive side of the ball, last season, App State defense gave up 378.7 yards of offense per game, 178 yards rushing, and 200.3 yards passing. This was a slight uptick in total compared to 2022, and quite a bit increase in rushing yards, almost 50 yards more per game in comparison to 2022. How did the defensive unit look as a whole this spring?
Better. I have to give some context to those numbers. You mentioned there was about 50 more rushing yards on average. It was more than that. It was worse than that early in the season. One of the things that happened around mid-year, we were sitting with a losing record, and defensive coordinator Scott Sloan was looking at his personnel. The coaching staff had kind of a little bit of a heart-to-heart one day and said, you know what, the way we're aligned, the things we have done historically here, and this is a defense that has been pretty epic since we moved up to FBS. It has not changed. And Sloan did something that takes a lot of guts to do. He switches defense middle of the season, and we eliminated an outside linebacker who I would have called, maybe more of a kind of a linebacker type of body, minimal coverage duties, more of a run support off the edge type of player. And we replaced them with what we've called a star position, which is really more of an extra DB. And the goal was to get more speed on the field. So, that average you're talking about actually improved as the season went on and as that defense took hold. So that star defense that we played for the last, roughly 7 games of the season is kind of like Joey Aguilar. We haven't had a lot of time in it, They really ran it hard in spring. Really were refining a lot of the things. It's hard to do that during the season. You only got so much practice time. This was one of the biggest, emphasis that I saw from the defense was just understanding the principles of what they were doing. We brought in a couple of transfers that fit into that defense maybe a little bit better than some of the personnel we had, and they really look good. I think we're 3 deep in some position groups, which is a great luxury to have. But it's just a matter of continuing to become familiar there, because that was a huge transition for us that most people didn't even realize was taking place.
Yeah, that's absolutely difficult, changing a whole scheme
in season
mid-season.
like that, yeah.
So,
staying with the defense for App State anyway, the defensive line seemed fairly young last year. How they look this spring? Have they improved, and like who maybe stood out?
I think it's kind of interesting. There's actually a reasonable blend of experience there. It just wasn't experience necessarily at App State. We had a couple of transfer defensive ends that came in. Sean Collins came in from Rutgers. Mike Fletcher came in from Michigan State, and they were learning our defense. Now they are veterans who had played obviously at a very high level in the Big Ten, but they hadn't taken maybe a ton of snaps at that level. So they're new on the field and they're new to our defense, but they're also kind of veteran guys. They've been in some pretty big situations, and when you're practicing against that kind of competition every day, you have to improve. There's just no way not to get better. So that was important. We had Santana Hopper, who is a younger player that really it was intended to be playing at defensive end, but because of some attrition and some things that happened injury wise, we had to flip him in, put him on the nose. And he was phenomenal. For a 255-pound guy to deal with a center and generally a guard from one direction or the other coming to double team him, he created a lot of havoc and ended up being recognized as one of the top players in the Sun Belt at that position. You're going to see him move back outside the defensive end. I think that's where he's ultimately going to be most effective. We've got some younger guys that we can bring inside. I think there may be some portal work that goes on the defensive line too. Listen, it's portal season coming up. There's going to be some attrition, and there will be opportunities to backfill some spots. But I think all in all, the defensive line group was good. We also went through a coaching change there. Eric McDaniel, who was once a GA here at App, was the defensive line coach at Troy last season. He came back in after Vic Cabral took a defensive position at West Virginia. So a lot of transition going on, guys having a new voice leading them and some new principles and that kind of thing. But, I didn't see any gaps in the way they performed during spring ball. Sometimes a new coach comes in and you don't expect the unit to be really sharp right out of the gate. That wasn't the case. They look good. He understood what we were trying to do. He worked in a 3-4 defense last year, so it was all familiar to him. And I think they looked good, but I think there will be better continuity as they continue to work through summer and into fall.
All right, let's move back to the next line of defense there. The linebacking group loses their leading tackler in Maine. Their man in the middle of that defense, Andrew Parker Jr. How did the linebackers look?
Yeah, Andrew was another guy who had a really good pro day on Monday. I think he probably has really earned himself some opportunities. So one of the things when I mentioned that defensive transition that took place, and I said we took an old position that was more of a kind of an outside linebacker spot, all the guys that were in that outside linebacker spot when we flipped the defense moved to inside linebacker. Okay, so now you're completely changing what those guys were doing and what they understand. So there was still some of that transition going on. We've got some younger guys that we've brought in as well. The competition was really good. I would say there are 6 guys there that are fighting for significant game day reps. I don't know that I think a starting pair has been identified yet. And I don't take that to be a negative. Some people would, I don't. I think, when you've got 6 guys who are competing with one another and you can't really discern these 2 guys are, head and shoulders better than the rest, then that means you've got different guys who can come in and perform when they need to. So I think that competition is going to continue into fall practice, but I think there's depth there that you can count on, and that's the important thing. They just got to continue to understand what we're trying to do with the defense, and for some of them, it's still new.
That's great to hear. It's nice to have all that depth. You talked about getting through a season without injuries. Injuries happen. It's a part of the game, so it's good to have that part of your defense be nice and deep.
When we look at the defense in terms of returning production, the defensive backfield seems to have probably took the biggest hit in terms of guys they lost, losing Nick Ross and E.J. Jackson at safety and Tyreek Funderburk cornerback. How did that unit look this spring, and who do you think we can expect to kind of move into those starting roles?
Yeah, well, and one thing I will note is E.J. Jackson was actually the guy that was playing that star position I mentioned earlier. So he wasn't in the secondary in the traditional sense, but he was very important to the defense. Nick Ross is a guy that is tough to replace. Nick is very unusual in today's day and age. He came in as a freshman, played right away. He played here for 5 seasons, used his COVID waiver, and he never missed a game. Played a lot of ball in special teams, started a number of games for us. And Nick was just a leader by example. So, a couple of things happened at free safety there in his spot. Ronald Clark, who also has started a lot of games at free here for us, is back. We brought in Miles Farmer, who spent 4 years at Nebraska, played last season at Syracuse. He's here for a grad season. Very impressive guy. I mean, he's number one, he looks like a Power 5 safety. Frankly, he looks like some of our outside linebackers. He's just that big, but also very smart. When I see a guy who's trying to absorb the defense and I see him self-correcting, I see him identify, oh, you know what, I should have been here. I should have taken this leverage. He knew what he needed to be doing even when he wasn't doing it. And I think he's going to fit in very quickly there. As far as Tyreek Funderburk, who ran a pair of 4.39 40s on Pro Day on Monday. We've got a couple of guys that were here last season. Right now, Trent Yao is a guy who transferred here last season from junior college. Very rangy, long-armed, SEC kind of looking corner. Can really manhandle a receiver. Long arms. He has really taken a huge step forward. I may have been more impressed with his progress individually in camp than any other defender I saw. There will be some good competition there. I think we're probably, we just committed a transfer corner. We needed probably a little more experience back there. So a guy who I think probably competes for playing time, probably competes for maybe a nickelback situation. But I feel really good about the group. Ethan Johnson, who's the corner to the boundary side, was all conference last year. And he's just one of those really instinctive players who knows how to manage himself, knows what he needs to do, knows where he needs to be. And then at strong safety, Jordan Favors, who's an absolutely phenomenal playmaker. He's just got to be more consistent. He can make a play that just absolutely everybody's mouth hangs open. And he's also capable of making mistakes. And, it's cleaning up the mistake part is the only thing that prevents him from being on the field, as often as he probably should be. But he was much steadier in spring ball, and I think he's probably the starter in that spot coming into the season.
With Farmer's size, do you think they're going to use him in that hybrid star role, or is there somebody else?
No, I don't think you use him there. We brought in a transfer from North Carolina A&T, again, going FCS a little bit. Avarian Cole is a guy who came in and, frankly, he took over the star position almost from day one. It was just he's one of those guys that's just kind of built for it. I think they like Miles on the back end back there because, one, despite his size, he covers a lot of ground. He's very rangy, but he's just so smart and he's big enough to come downhill. For us with a free safety, depending on what the alignment is on the other side of the ball, those guys, we call on those guys to come down, get in the linebacker group and get physical. And I think that certainly he's somebody that fits that mold. So no, I see Farmer definitely sticking at free safety, and Cole is more than capable of holding down that star role.
So you named a lot of great defensive pieces here for 2024. If you had to pick a defensive player that's going to have their breakout in 2024? Who do you think that is?
For me, that's going to be Nate Johnson. Nate was playing at what we call the dog outside linebacker. The best way I could describe him is it's more of a stand-up edge rusher. He's number 90. If you guys are watching any film, Nate came in as a true freshman last year, and he was just one of those guys you couldn't keep him off the field.
He had a great year last year.
Yeah, he did. He's just too talented for that. He's 6'5". I think he probably played most of last year. I don't know if he was 240 pounds. Probably that would be a stretch. He's a good season of weight room time and just focusing on his diet and his body and those kinds of things. He's going to be a monster this year. And he's, as you said, he was very productive last year. I don't think we've seen anywhere close to his best yet. And that's kind of frightening to say with the numbers.
Scary.
But he's a guy that I'm incredibly excited to watch this year because I think he's next level talent, just to put it simply.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Now the spring practice is over, and you got to see all the different position groups and some of the newcomers. Was there a particular group that you felt most concerned about, or the coaches were most concerned about heading into the next portal period?
I guess I would kind of go back to a couple of areas where I did mention potential portal activity, and it was not so much starting groups as depth. Offensive line, we probably need a little more experience there. Defensive line, I think there are a couple of spots where we would like to have maybe some more experienced game rep kind of talent in there. It's not that we don't have guys that can play it, but a lot of our guys are younger, and it's a lot to ask to put them in some of the situations you're going to put them in. So there's the unknown. Again, the portal's going to open in May. And we have had a couple of defensive linemen already jump in. Their roles probably weren't quite what they wanted them to be, and that's just part of the game today. Yeah. So I think that probably on the line of scrimmage is where you will see the majority of any activity that we undertake in May.
So going into 2024, what is the strength of this App State team?
I think the strength of this team and the strength of this program, frankly, is always the culture. It's the expectation of winning. You guys, your intro video captured a lot of that. The expectation. I can tell you this, having been at most of our Power 5 wins over time, you don't win those games unless you expect to go in and win those games. And I just don't think that every program goes into something like that and expects to win that game. That's part of the culture here. So, it was the culture when we had a losing record last year and then we won, 6 of our last 7. The culture was what carried that. It's the belief in it. It's the belief in one another. It's the understanding of the expectations here are different. They are higher. And, it's accepting those. It's accepting that challenge that I think makes the team so unique. So, it's not one thing that's unique about one team. It's what carries over from year to year and from team to team. As you change over, and I don't care how many people you bring back, if you're not bringing everybody back, it's a different team. And, I think that's where you have to have something that sustains you, something that carries you through. And it's the culture here, and it's unique. Everyone talks about what makes their program unique. I don't even know how to explain it. It just exists. And, I think when it's as strong as that, players can come in and put the me part of it aside for the we. And, that's really what it's all about. And, I think that that's what's going to carry us forward. And, certainly when you finish the season with as much momentum as App State did, that becomes the expectation. We want to carry that over. We want to build on that and carry it forward. Now, the schedule is not the most forgiving one in the world. You go to Clemson week 2, you go to East Carolina week 3, you better have it ready to go or you can get exposed pretty quickly. But, I really feel like this is just a program that's built for those kinds of challenges. And, frankly, they've proven it out over time.
And that's the thing that gets built with history is you said it's really hard to say. I played college baseball, and it's kind of like, when you turn it over to the bullpen and you're up by 1, you just know you're going to lose because that's kind of what the history has taught you type thing. And it's like, football, you got those 1-score games, or, you got this field goal kicker that comes out and always nails it. When you're up or down, like you could be down by, you could have a crazy fourth quarter game against North Carolina and just like, hey, we're going to score points.
Yeah, I seem to recall one of those at some point in the past.
Yeah. So it's this mind state that you're like, we're never out of it. We're good. We deserve to be here. We're good enough. And it's hard to put into words, but it is definitely that culture that you're talking about.
Well, in this day and age, we alluded to it earlier. The transfer portals are such a huge deal, and the NIL is a big deal. How have you kind of seen that change the recruitment of new players and the retention of existing players at App State?
Boy, it's hard to answer that question because it feels like it changes every season. But I think to kind of echo head coach Sean Clark, he always wants this to be a development program. I think certainly as long as he is here, there will always be an emphasis on high school players going in, bringing them in, finding the kinds of people, and it is about finding players, but here it's about finding the people too that fit who we are, fit what we want to do, and then building them up and developing them into the next generation of App State players. I think in an ideal world now, let me stop there and I'll go back to the NIL question and the portal question. Look, it's foolish to think in the portal era that you're going to hang on to everybody. You're going to have to go fill some spots here and there. I think if you can use the portal to bridge maybe an opening or a gap in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 positions, that's one thing. And NIL becomes a part of that because, it's gotten to the point where, to even have a player come make an official visit with you, he wants to know what the opportunities are from an NIL perspective. App State has its own way of handling that and managing that, but it's just part of the game now. So love it, hate it, whatever you want to do, it's there. So we might as well accept dealing with it. But I think we'll always be a development program first, and hope to use the portal to fill in gaps. And I think as long as we're doing that, then probably we're in pretty good shape. If we have to go wholesale into the portal, that's going to be very unusual, and that's an indication that something hasn't gone the way we probably would have liked it to. It's just so hard to predict anymore, and very difficult to manage. I mean, when I don't know of many football programs anymore that don't have an official general manager title on their staff. You have to have it. I mean,
you're reading our minds.
It's really like the NFL. If you think of high school kids like draft picks and portal guys like free agents, you might as well have a GM that has to help manage those kinds of things, because it's so hard to keep up with head counts and personnel and, where are we going to need somebody and making sure we don't over recruit in a spot. It's a real Rubik's Cube, to try to deal with, because, you think you've got one side matched up and then you realize something's wrong on the other side. There are just so many pieces and parts to manage. And, at some point, football coaches actually have to coach football. And if they're having to manage the board constantly all the time and try to navigate that, then something's going to slip.
Now, so I'm just kind of reading between the lines again. I'm assuming they have a position that kind of does that. Oftentimes you hear it's the head coach, right? Where they're the ones, worrying about that. They're the one, they basically are a general manager at this point, not really able to coach.
And a fundraiser, and this and that.
Yeah, I mean, we do have somebody officially in a general manager's role here, and that is what they are responsible for aligning and organizing recruiting for the staff, and certainly always with staff input. We got a veteran staff here. I mean, we've got 3 guys on the staff who have been recruiting coordinators at some point during their careers. So you want to tap into that knowledge and that expertise. But you've also got to have somebody that can just spend the time putting it down on paper, putting it on a board, keeping it organized, and letting the football coaches, sit there and watch the film and come up with game plans and do the things that they need to do. I don't know how at the FBS level you can possibly get by without having somebody committed to doing the work of roster management. It's just, I don't even think it's debatable anymore. You've got to have the spot.
Well, is there anything else you want to share with us that you think we should know about App State here in 2024?
I don't think. I mean, we've gone pretty much pillar to post at this point. I think it's a really great team. It's a team that last year had an opportunity to kind of pack it in. We're sitting there with a losing record, which does not happen up here very often. And, I think even, if I'm going to be blunt about it, even a lot of the fan base maybe wasn't where they needed to be mentally. I've been around this program for 10 years now, covering it. I've been very fortunate to be invited kind of behind the curtain by a lot of the coaches who've been here. And, I recognized mid-season last year that the team wasn't coming apart. At the point at which you would normally say, okay, here's where it's going to fracture, it didn't. And, I knew then, all they need to do is come up with the right schemes, the right mixture of players. They're going to be fine because, they're not coming apart. I didn't see infighting. I didn't see finger pointing. Nobody was jumping off the bandwagon. And I said, if that is in place under the worst of times, when things turn, this team can really pick up momentum and accelerate quickly. And that was exactly what they did. Again, they won 6 of the last 7 games they played in the Sun Belt Conference Championship, and they won one of the most grueling and messiest bowl games I could possibly ever imagine. So, if it weren't for the fortitude that this group had last year, they wouldn't be together in the form that they are this year. And now with momentum on their side, I'm just really excited to see what they can bring right out of the gate because, the way they finished the season was really impressive and, I have to say very exciting.
I mean, that win at JMU, right? JMU's undefeated, I think, at that point, right?
They were. They were
to Harrisburg and beat them at JMU. You're doing something.
Yeah, and I'm gonna tell you that was
game day, right?
Yeah, that was a game day for them, and it was a phenomenal crowd. I mean, they packed it in, and they were in it every moment of the game. It was a tough environment. It was a last second win. It was about as dramatic as it could be. And it was another game where I happened to be on the sideline for the radio call, and it was just to be down there in that environment was absolutely phenomenal. And that celebration in the locker room afterwards, was certainly worth the price of admission for me.
Hopefully you didn't get hit with too many purple streamers.
The streamers were that was quite an experience. I know there's one basketball program. I'm blanking on who it is that does that when they make their first basket of the game. But when it happened after every score, it got a little bit disruptive. But that's what makes college football so great. It's
really fun when they do it at away games.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm sure it probably is for everybody. I'm sure the cleanup crew especially loves that. But that's what makes it so much fun. Yeah. That's what makes it so great is those traditions. And and frankly, as an App State guy, I can tell you it was a hell of a lot of fun going in there and wrecking that undefeated record.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thanks for spending some time with us today. We got 54 minutes. It was a long one. We covered everything, like you said, from beginning to end there of App State. So hopefully everybody enjoyed listening to David. Go find him on X at App State Mania. Go follow him, and we'll be looking forward to see what the Mountaineers can do here in 2024.
Hey, football will be here before we know it.
Thanks again for your time, David.
Thank you, guys.